We're kicking off the show with the fight over voting rights and the battle to protect the bedrock of our democracy. In just a few minutes, demonstrators are expected at the Masters Golf Tournament in Augusta to protest Georgia's new draconian voting restrictions. And Texas just advanced a bill that, among other things, would make it a felony. You heard that right, a felony for an official to give a voter an absentee ballot application if said voter didn't request one. Now, as of March 24th, Republicans have introduced more than 360 voter restriction bills in 47 states. And in many states, these restrictions will specifically be hard on black voters. And look, I want to make this clear. This is not just in response to the 2020 election and the big lie. The voting rights of black Americans have been under attack since the 15th Amendment was passed, even if lawmakers don't explicitly spell it out. We see you. Jamelle Bouie of the New York Times wrote this about the Jim Crow era. There was no statute that said black people cannot vote. Instead, Southern lawmakers spun a web of restrictions and regulations meant to catch most blacks, as well as many whites, and keep them out of the electorate. And in a throwback to that time, a writer for the conservative National Review recently opined, the republic might be better served by having fewer but better voters. Like who, friend? Land-owning white folks? Because that sounds very familiar. Now, corporate criticism of these bills have spread like wildfire. This was, of course, after these public pressure campaigns. But this unusual move has the GOP crying cancel culture.
I found it completely discouraging to find a bunch of corporate CEOs getting in the middle of politics. My advice to the corporate CEOs of America is to stay out of politics. Don't pick sides in these big fights.
Now, McConnell later walked back those comments because I guess Playboy remembered just how much corporations donate to his campaign. Joining me now is New Jersey Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman and Fernand Amandi, political analyst and host of the Strange Days podcast. So happy to have you both to kick off the show. Congresswoman, I want to start with you because you've been very out front on this issue. You've penned a letter to the DOJ asking them to intervene here. And I think for the folks watching at home, that's the question. What can we do? How can we battle this if it goes to the courts, if it goes to Congress, or if it's left up to the people? Tell me about this letter you penned to the DOJ.
You know, when I saw these voter suppression laws cropping up state by state by state, and I thought about the connection between what has happened in terms of the perpetuation of lies with regard to the transparency of the last election since the last election. And I realized that this was a coordinated effort. Well, it scared me. It reminded me of all of the suppression and oppression that African Americans in particular have experienced in trying to cast their votes. It reminded me of the civil rights movement when people lost their lives just trying to get the right to vote. And so this established in my mind a pattern that was used, that is going to be used to disenfranchise us. To try to be selective about who gets to vote and how easy it gets for some people to vote and how difficult it'll be for others to vote. And so I wanted to make sure that we were addressing this, especially black women, since everyone says we were so significant in the outcome of the election and the outcome of organizations and things of that nature. I wanted to make sure that we were on the record early, that we see this as a problem, that we see this as a coordinated effort, and that we want the Justice Department to look at it also to determine whether or not any of these laws or any of this sort of coordination represents some form of conspiracy, whether or not that there's a civil issue here or a criminal issue here. But we need to be on record that we will do everything we can on our platform to hold hearings, to ask questions, and do investigations. But we're going to ask the Justice Department, that is a real Justice Department now, to look to see what laws you ought to be enforcing and how you ought to interpret the collectivity of these laws that are so similar being offered across the states.
Well, Congresswoman, I want to stick with you here for a moment because we all heard the sound from Senator Joe Manchin this week saying that there is nothing he would do to abolish the filibuster. So essentially, he's standing in the way of this progress. So when we look to Congress, H.R. 1. I mean, this is, essentially federalizing elections while the Democrats hold this slim majority. It does not stand a good chance of passing. Joe Manchin is standing between this and the progress when it comes to voter suppression. What can Congress do? I mean, it feels like he's kind of on a power trip. And speaking of power, maybe it's time for him to get ghosts. But you make the point about black women being on the front lines. What can we do?
Well, I think that Joe's relationship with the other Joe in the White House might be very helpful in moving forward some of this legislation that's so vitally important. I don't think that Senator Manchin would knowingly support the kind of voter suppression and use the institutions of the Senate to do the things that Storm Thurmond did, and trying to suppress the participation of African Americans. And I think that at the end of the day, we'll be able to work out something with Mr. Manchin.
I hope you're right, because knowingly or unknowingly, the outcome is still the same. So, Fernand, let me turn to you on this, because something that's been very frustrating to me is this conversation around H.R. 1 and these voter suppression legislation bills that are coming up, that we need to make the bill more palatable. And I have to tell you, Fernand, I have zippy interest in making my right to vote palatable to anybody, former GOP operatives or current GOP operatives who think that somehow their opinion matters in this. What do you say to folks who say, look, you can pass some of this legislation, just make us more comfortable with it?
Well, Tiffany, I think it's critically important to reflect on what the Congresswoman said in her comments earlier. She used two words that I think hit the nail on the head: coordinated effort. And what the Congresswoman is saying is that this is an actual conspiracy by the Republican Party. Let's call out the culprits here, based on a fraudulent conspiracy theory, which is just a fig leaf to get what's at the heart of this, and that is race and power. Given the demographic changes in America and the growth of the non-white voter electorate, there is an existential fear by the Republican Party that the more folks that exercise their right to vote, the more likely they are to stay out of power. And if we've seen the trend over the last 20 years, certainly in the popular national vote, that is exactly the trend. But I think the other question that you and the Congresswoman raised is critically important, and it is, what is our plan? What can we as Americans do about it? And I think the truth of the matter is we have to treat voting now as an act of survival, because it is an act of survival. In the same way we never forget our birthdays or our anniversaries or, the big days that we celebrate in life, we have to take the same approach to voting and not plan 2 weeks or 2 months out. Right now, what is your plan for 2022 and 2024? Because these restrictions are going to be in place. You've seen it. You had it at the top of the segment, the map all over the country. The Republicans are not going to stop, because this is about their survival. So the countermeasure that we can do as Americans acting in good faith is develop our voting plan. Now, the other quick point you made, what is the Biden administration going to do? I think they've done an outstanding job so far in these first almost 100 days in showing what a real American administration can look like. My one concern is I have a sense that they feel that if they lead on policy, that is going to make the case. I'm not sure that that's the approach when you're in a power fight here. Right. And that is why the passage of H.R. 1 is so critically important, Tiffany.
All right, Fernand, you brought up some really good points, and I want to add someone to the conversation. I want to bring in Cristina Sensoon Ramirez. She's the executive director of Next Gen America. This is the largest organization mobilizing young voters. Cristina, so happy you could join us this morning. And I want you, because Fernand brought up the point about the voting electorate changing. So I want you to take a listen to what Tucker Carlson said about this replacement theory on his show.
I know that the left and all the little gatekeepers on Twitter become literally hysterical if you use the term replacement, if you suggest that the Democratic Party is trying to replace the current electorate, the voters now casting ballots, with new people, more obedient voters from the third world. But they become hysterical because that's what's happening, actually. Let's just say it. That's true. So I don't understand why we don't understand this. I mean, everyone wants to make a racial issue out of it. Ooh, the white replacement theory. No. This is a voting rights question. I have less political power because they're importing a brand new electorate. Why should I sit back and take that?
Yeah, he stays big mad all the time about the changing demographics of the country. So, Christina, I mean, you hear them saying that is the fear. This is the fear, right? That more black and brown voters are going to find their way to the polls. It's always been the fear. How do we combat that, particularly when you have folks in the media who are trying to present this as though there's another side to this debate other than voter suppression?
Yeah, and nothing makes me angrier than getting asked the question, what is your response to the fraud? And I say, let's be clear, there's no fraud being perpetrated by black and brown voters. The fraud is being perpetrated against us. And I live in Texas, the largest battleground state in the country, where the majority of our population is now brown and black. And we have a legislative body largely that doesn't look like our population. And they have a choice. They can try and win on the merit of their ideas and actually respond to our needs, or guess what? We're going to vote for a party and candidates that do. And instead of doing that, instead of trying to represent our needs, they're trying to change the rules of the game and bend the rules and break them in any way imaginable. And the Congresswoman is right. This is a calculated, cunning effort to look at the patterns of black and brown voters and try and divide them. And here in Texas is a beautiful image that people are seeing. Every year in Texas, 270,000 young people of color turn 18. We dropped this week, Next Gen America and Jolt, 250,000 rose petals in the Texas Rotunda while we sang Amazing Grace. And it was so powerful and so beautiful. And the point of it was that we're fighting their darkness with our light, their ugliness with our beauty, and that if you try and cut a rose bush down, it will grow back. And as communities of color, the last thing I want to say is that we are well aware that people mobilized, marched, and some died for us to have this right to vote. And we are not going to give it up without a righteous fight.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.